Nakakonect na tayo. Ayan, mga kameta, kamusta kayo dyan? Medyo mahina yata ang internet ko dito ngayon. Ayan tayo, na third world style tayo. Kamusta kayo dyan? Ayan, I just felt may konting oras tayo dito before I go back to my next speaking engagement. So by the way, maraming salamat again dun sa mga kaibigan natin sa Bicol Open University. Thank you for your invitation kanina. I had to just adjust things a little bit. My panel talk this morning and then meron akong talk right after this. So, dito, while nag-Zoom talk naman tayo dyan with our friends in Bicol University. So, maraming salamat. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. Hopefully, in the future, we have more time to meet and greet yung mga estudyante, mga kaibigan natin, mga kameta natin all around the country. So, before I go rush to the next speaking engagement at naghanap pa ako ng Vietnamese coffee dito na malakas. Sabi ko sana kung pwede tayo magkonting marites dito, no? Marites with the heart. Marites with the substance, no? Ayan, habang yan ang gusto natin puntahan eh. Mga Dolomite Beach, oh. Ayan, oh, may Dolomite din sila dito. Dolomite. Ayan, habang hindi tayo nagda-Dolomite Beach, mga kameta, sabi ko, mag heart to heart tayo na mabilisan dito. Now, very quickly mga kameta, now this morning we had very intensive, extensive discussion with some of the experts here from across ASEAN, from across Indo-Pacific, friends from Australia, friends from Korea, friends from Malaysia, friends from Indonesia, friends from the United States, friends from Japan, among others. So, pinag-usapan talaga namin dito is US-China rivalry, especially economic rivalry. So, nung first panel, actually 8 a.m., 9 a.m. yung first panel. 9 a.m. yung first panel. That was a foundational presentation by a Korean professor, friends of ours. Very good presentation. And one of the things na pinag-usapan namin in the morning is whether pwede mag-compensate ng mga India, Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam if ever magkaroon ng total sanctions on China or magkakaroon ng tinatawag na decoupling, no? So, yun yung debate ngayon, whether China is too important that you cannot sanction them, you cannot isolate them, or that China may not be as important as many think and that there could be alternatives to China. How much of a China plus can we talk about, no? In fact, for me, it's a question of how much Thailand plus we can talk about, or even Taiwan plus we can talk about. Thailand plus in a sense of, syempre yung Thailand kasi nagbibuild ng mostly mga Japanese cars sa Southeast Asia, no? Including mga Fortuner, yung mga ganyang cars. Di sana gagawin na lang sa Pilipinas, hindi lang Vios. Taiwan plus in a sense na hindi lang sana lahat TSMC na high-end conductors, sana ibang conductors gagawin na lang sa Pilipinas, ibang Southeast Asian countries. We already see a lot of semiconductors are moving to Vietnam, for instance. We can see Samsung, LG, some of the top companies are moving some of their production to Vietnam. Toyota moving a lot of production from Thailand to Indonesia and hopefully more to the Philippines. So the argument that we're having right now with a lot of economists and experts here, mostly economists yung mga kausap natin, is whether there is a chance to properly rebalance the world economy in such a way that hindi tayo masyadong dependent lang sa China. Because if the world is too dependent on China, then that undermines our economic security. Economic security is something that is common sense because, for instance, during the Cold War period, Germany made sure that not more than 20-25% of its total energy imports, gas imports, came from Russia. Because if you're too dependent on an authoritarian country or a rival superpower or a hostile power for your basic energy needs, then you're very vulnerable. Kaya nga na-mention ko yung fact na more than 40% ng ating national grid, for instance, 40% national grid natin kontrolado ng isang Chinese company. No? At alam natin sa China, it's not a fully capitalist system. The private sector is under the thumb of the government, whether they want it or not. Diba? So speaking of that, one of the things we had to do was to really go into the strengths and weaknesses of all other countries that combined can somehow rebalance the world economy from over-dependence on China. So there comes India, the other big one, then Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, and then Vietnam. So around 5 or 6 countries we're looking at whether they can collectively be some sort of an alternative to China if things really go haywire between US and China. This Cold War really gets out of control, and let's say the question will be, will the world economy collapse without China, right? Or will China be in a position to dictate the terms to the West? or to the rest of us? Can we be more self-reliant or less dependent on China? Can we get more of the high-end investments that is mostly concentrated in China? So one of the things that happened kanina, there are two things I want to talk about. There's still a lot to discuss, mga kameta. The first thing is, medyo nakaka-depress yung position ng Philippines because if you look at economic competitiveness, if you look at manufacturing sophistication, if you look at human development index and human capital, ang Philippines ay pinakamalaking potential. In fact, we rank pretty well in terms of our overall attributes for economic competitiveness, pero ang baba ng output natin, yung ranking natin sa output. Ang baba ng improvement natin sa human development index, which is very essential, of course, to making sure na we have the necessary human capital for building high-end industries. Ang baba rin ng ranking ng Philippines when it comes to research and development investments. So, Korea, for instance, is top 2, top 3 in the world. When it comes to manufacturing sophistication, Japan is number 1, Thailand is number 9 in the world. Right? See, I remember these numbers very well because they were really striking to me. So, medyo nakaka-depress mga kameta na meron kang sitwasyon kung saan parang Pilipinas, even compared to other comparable countries like Vietnam or especially Thailand and Malaysia, ang layo pa natin, right? But the Philippines has to be part of the conversation of going beyond China or even going beyond Thailand because of our location, because of our attributes, because of our potential, because of what we used to be in the 50s and 60s, which made us the perfect host for the Asian Development Bank by the mid-1960s, no? So medyo na-dismaya lang ako kasi the numbers of the Philippines were nowhere close to competitive. But in fairness, in terms of overall attributes, not too bad ang Philippines. But it's a question of activating those attributes, no? That's one thing that we have to keep in mind, mga kameta. The second area of discussion we had was, I'm sure you guys have not heard about Indo-Pacific Economic Framework because, I mean, this is really an initiative of the Biden administration to make sure that there's more integration among different economies in this part of the world when it comes to green infrastructure, resilient economies, rule of law, supply chain resilience, so on and so forth. The other thing we notice here is that the U.S. also doesn't have much to offer in terms of concrete new economic initiatives. So U.S. is a big trading partner for Vietnam, for Philippines, for Malaysia. But in terms of new trade agreements, wala masyado. Medyo kapos, medyo kulang. So para kami pa nga, yung mga nasa region, we're wondering what can come up here because you don't want to also be too dependent on China alone. Diba? Yun ang gusto natin mangyari. But one of the things that is interesting that came out dun sa mga discussion natin with some of our ASEAN countries is that there's a lot of also skepticism towards China, but also there's a lot of skepticism towards US. We can see that in fact even with Singapore, because in Singapore, for instance, one worry they have is that once the US starts to impose many sanctions on Chinese semiconductors, high-tech industries, damay-damay na yan, kawawa na rin sila, apektado na rin sila. And countries like Singapore and to lesser degree countries like Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, then Indonesia and Philippines behind with India, they are very much part of China-centered production network or supply chains. Kasi nothing sophisticated today is made in one country. You know, yung tinatawag na added values. Some parts are made in Malaysia, some parts are made in China, some parts are made in US. So for instance, iPhone, the design is from California. The Foxconn of Taiwan is in charge of overseeing the supply chains and assembly in China, right? And then increasingly some iPhones are being assembled in Vietnam or in India. So it's a globalized production network. It's not a national production network like it used to be, no? Because that's the only way you can keep it competitive. Build different parts of a product in different countries in ways that makes most profit and least cost. So most global brands, practically all global brands are globalized also in terms of their production network. So your hope is the Philippines will be more and more part of this and will move up the value chain. But the big problem right now is walang concrete initiatives ng US. US is not doing much in terms of putting really something on the table. For instance, US was behind the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Trump pulled out of it. Biden wanted to propose just a modified, watered-down digital free trade agreement. His own people cannot agree on that. In the meantime, China's Belt and Road Initiative, and ang dami ng mga propaganda points na nakakuha dyan, even though walang investment masyado nangyari sa Pilipinas, so mukhang ewan yung US, habang wala naman talagang ginagawa ng China masyado, but still that gives China a kind of an edge because they seem to be the fresh, new, exciting new power. And that has its own effects, psychological effects. So I notice a lot of regional experts are so critical of US, but they're not as critical of China, even though the numbers actually don't say that China is necessarily benign economic superpower, right? Like one of the things I always say is this: Indonesia and Malaysia have been essentially reduced to raw material exporters because China kept on, especially Indonesia, because China just got all of the low-end manufacturing that used to be in Southeast Asia. Even in the Philippines, I think back in the day we used to make not only Marikina shoes, but a lot of Lee, Jag, a lot of this textiles. And then they moved to China. Now they're moving back because China's mataas na masyado. Tumaas na sila sa value chain. So, but yun nga, like, as Pinoys, we tend to be very critical about China. But what's interesting is you go across ASEAN, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, they're more critical of US right now because they're making a lot out of the relationship with China. And with US, they see more sticks than carrots. They see more sizzle than steak. You know, it's just fascinating because mga kametag, sanay tayo to always see about anong kulang sa China, ano hindi natin nakuha sa China. But actually, the reality in the Philippines is very different because the Philippines, and yun yung magiging discussion ko mamaya, so I have to leave shortly. The Philippines, mga kameta, is less exposed to China, less dependent on China than most of our neighbors. But also that means that we have lost a lot of opportunity. And the sad thing is that with the US also, we don't even have a new free trade agreement, new investment agreement, etc. So the hope is this Indo-Pacific Economic Framework or any version of that in the coming future will kind of help the Philippines to move up the value chain. My really suggestion here, mga kameta, is ano to, may promo ako bigla. Ay, wag na yan. Scam pala yan. Sorry, bigla, Ilocano sa bigla na, uy, promo, baka may discount tayo dyan. Bigla, ay, wala, scam pala to. Talaga mga, ay. Ano to? Mali ang press natin, okay. Nasaan na? Okay, kasi din connect ko rin sana dito sa YouTube, ang hina ng internet bigla dito, masyado tayong sa taas yata. No, anyway mga kamay, basta these are the discussions we're having. I'll do one more lecture talk right now on the Philippines part and the Indo-Pacific, etc. Then balikan ko kayo, no? Sayang hindi ko dala yung OBS ko, doon natin sana i-discuss para I'll show you the graphs and data and all. Pero God willing, hopefully once I have my other laptop in hand, we can discuss those things with graphs and data and all. But I'm just saying, in the meantime, it's just fascinating how the others in the region are benefiting way more from China. At the same time, they're getting less bullying when it comes to territorial issues. Tayo, more bullying than benefits. And then, ang gulo pa natin. Pero wala rin tayong masyadong nakuha sa mga Amerikano rin. Because I think we have not played our cards well also over time. Anyway, mga komenta, thank you very much. I'll just say hi also dun sa kabila sa YouTube. Parang hindi gumagana isang para hindi magtampo yung mga supporters natin dyan. But thank you guys. I'll get back to you soon again. Let's have more discussions on this. Hopefully, kung may energy mamaya, sige, mamaya na lang tayo. But I'm just saying, ang daming opportunities dyan. We just have to have a more active industrial and trade policy to make the most out of it. Yun lang. Despite all of the backwardness, all of the challenges we have, there's so much push for less reliance on China and also moving out of Thailand and investing in Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam. So we have to really make the most out of it. So I'm really interested and excited to talk more to other experts in the region to get a better picture. But the numbers I was looking at a while ago and the numbers I have in my presentation, they're fascinating. They're fascinating. Both points for opportunities and points also for challenges. All right? Talk to you guys soon. Maraming salamat.